Hi everyone. Yeah, with me today I have Sol Rashidi. She doesn't need really any introduction, but she's a best-selling author of the AI Survival Guide. She's a former chief data and chief data analytics officer of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. I believe she was a partner at the Big Four. She holds 8 patents in the technical data and AI space. And Sol is just a rock star. Okay, so super thankful for your time, Sol, talking to me today. Welcome to my podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here, especially after the way we had met, Igor, several months ago. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we met in Switzerland, and it was a very fun discussion. Excellent. So yeah, let's start right off the bat. Being really a rock star CDO, what do you think most companies get wrong when hiring for a CDO or setting up a CDO role on the one hand? And on the other hand, what do you think most first-time CDO hires get wrong when they step into the role?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm very close with my peer community. As they say, misery loves company. So I know a lot of the CDOs and CAOs and CDAOs out there. So far, there's a claim that I was the first back in 2016 as a chief data and AI officer for Royal Caribbean. And what I've learned in the process is 3 things. It has very little to do with your confidence and your IQ, and a lot to do with your EQ, BQ, and SQ. It is not a position that's about how smart you are or about how you're going to be able to solve the problems. And I had absolutely no idea. And I think most people go in as a CDO just happy to get a title, happy to be an executive, happy to be in a C-suite ranks, and like, yes, it's a badge and honor. It's not until you actually step into the role that you realize it is really about developing relationships, clear communication, the narrative and the story of like, so what's in it for me? How are you going to mobilize and evangelize and change behavior so that, even if you do build analytics as a service, people have to redirect all the models that they've built on their local stores and go into a new platform, new solution, new interface. There's one thing in terms of solving a problem and building a capability. It is a completely different skill set in order to scale that capability and make it operational and within a company. And none of it has anything to do with IQ. All of it has to do with your emotional quotient, your social quotient, and your business quotient, understanding what it is they do, where they struggle, and translating what you're building and why it's going to solve the problems that they're struggling with on a day-to-day basis, but also building the relationships that they trust you. So they trust you and they actually take that leap of faith in changing gears. I think that's the first. It has less to do about my technical know-how and more to do about my communication and storytelling, evangelizing, and selling internally. I didn't realize that 60% of my job was selling. And I think that's the second point. You assume that when they're hiring a chief data officer, it's because they fundamentally believe that data is an asset. They're not where they need to be. They want to monetize. They want to capitalize. They know it's going to provide them a competitive advantage. All the buzzwords that we hear, so that this company, the corporation, the executives are already sold on bringing on board a chief data officer to be able to put these things in place. Only to find out that once you're in, that doesn't buy you any goodwill. That doesn't clear the runway for you. A lot of it still has to do with internally selling and saying, if we want to do Y, we have to do Z. And if we have to do Z, you have to change A, B, and C. And change is
Right.
very, very difficult. So a lot of what you're doing is selling. So I would say
selling.
the first is, less about your technical competency and more about your EQ, BQ, and SQ. The second is realizing that a lot of your job is selling, because what ends up happening if you don't sell, if you don't visualize for them why they should do what you're asking them to do, you're going to build a lot of cool things that just aren't going to be used at all. And then it's going to happen where Gartner said that about, I think the latest statistic is 74% of CDOs have a mixed perception of the value they bring to the organization. And a majority of the reason is, one, people don't know what they do. And two, they don't see any business benefits for the business that they run. And so I think part of that is because you're not selling and communicating as pervasively as you need to. And then the third I would say is, it's one thing to bend and it's one thing to stretch existing knowledge workers and skill sets and the workforce and getting them to think differently, but it's another to break it. You have to be very realistic about the internal maturity and culture, and then align the capabilities with what they're willing to and can absorb realistically. Otherwise, once again, you get into the cycle of building something that's not going to be usable. And your job as a CDO is to operationalize any capability you introduce, not to build cool tools and facets that are just going to hang out to dry at some point in time. So I would say those are the three things. And if you realize none of it has to do with technical competence, even though most of us are technical.
Right. Well, exactly. And the point is, you know, they have to re-platform, but they have to do most of the work. You have to basically, what you're saying is, you have to also translate to them what's in it for them, to energize them to actually get on and go on to the new platform where they could do products, where they could, where they can migrate their, I don't know, workloads, their models, their dashboards, their everything. And there's a lot of organizational backlash to that, right? If you just start and say, okay, I'm this cool hotshot CDO, you guys should do it. And they're like, yeah, let me see that, how that's going to work out for you. It's a very tough, it's a very tough job. And that's why I think a lot of them struggle, and the average tenure is still, I think to this day is very, very short for something like CDO, CDAR, right?
Very much. I think most of us grew up in the enterprise data management space, the data governance space, platform, security, infrastructure. We've all taken different shapes, but like you get your really technical CDOs and they struggle. But then you get your
Right.
overly functional CDOs and they struggle. And I do think the position requires more of a balanced blend between techno-functional, which means that your
Right.
conversations can oscillate either with the data engineers, the data architects, the data scientists, and you can challenge their thinking. You can contribute to the architecture, because you need respect from that team. You need to understand what's being done and how it carries over into the business benefits. But you need to be functional in nature because you need to establish the strategy. You need to solve for the root causes, not the systematic features that everyone's experiencing. You need to be able to develop alliances. You need to learn how to negotiate. I can't even tell you how many negotiation conversations I've been in with the CIO, right? Because they own the infrastructure, but I have a heavy dependency on the infrastructure. And they've
Right.
already
Right.
got
Right.
100 things to do. And now I'm adding number 1, 2, 3, 4 on top of the 100. So I'm 101, I'm 102, I'm 103, but my stuff's a priority. So, you're constantly negotiating between when things can get done and the resources they can make available. But also the businesses like running a business. They are heads down running a P&L. While they want these things to be in place, they don't want to put the time that it takes to actually put those things in place. And so it just takes a lot more effort that has nothing to do with like the technical background. So I think the techno functional blend and balance will position you better than being overly functional or overly technical. But that just means now the work starts. It doesn't give you an advantage.
Very, very interesting, and absolutely true, and speaks volumes to the kind of mixed skill sets you have to develop to survive basically in that role. And actually, this kind of brings me to your survival guide. It sort of implies that it is about surviving because the challenge is so tremendous to run such a complex set of initiatives in order to achieve a business outcome that sometimes, a lot of it is about also educating the rest of the C-suite about this stuff, and that's also difficult to do with the EQ perspective, right? To not be in a way where you're translating, but you're not, speaking
Yeah.
down or speaking to them as if they, don't understand that stuff, as if it's not their idea, right?
100. And honestly, that's a really good point. I have been called condescending before. And it came in my first position because I know this space so well and I love this space and I'm passionate about this space. And they brought me on board to solve for all the issues that they're experiencing. So the first mistake I made was, okay, I understand the problems and here's how we're going to solve it. And when I received
Right.
pushback, I'm like, no, you don't understand. To solve it, this is what we need to do. There is no alternative. And yeah, I was high and mighty. I was like, you brought me in to do a job and you're not letting me do my job. And then but that's the thing. You make those mistakes and you don't realize, like, I don't understand how many times do I have to like repeat myself. Like, there's a few ways of solving it, but it still comes down to the fundamentals. And that interaction, I was not taking notice of. But that interaction is
Right.
super important in building your credibility and your perceived value and your ability to partner. And quite frankly, their ability to trust you. And so I learned, right? Scrape knees, bruised elbows, lessons learned of like that partnership is super important anytime you're
Right. Right.
developing
Right.
something. And you can't expect the other side to know your space as well as you do. And there has to be an element of tolerance and patience and time that you have to allocate towards educating in a very humble manner versus educating via a condescending manner because you're in a rush to build the stuff because you know how to solve their problems. It's not your
Right. Right.
timetable,
Right.
their timetable.
Well, I mean, I know it's going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but reading your book, there's one thing that came to mind was like you're good at okay, you translate this, to the C-suite, you translate this down to the engineers, you have the respect of both, you understand all that. But then you alluded to building alliances. And I think, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think sometimes what the CDO position or head of data or this kind of leadership role in data and AI tends to do is put you in a position where your peers have a bit of trouble with you. So yeah, the board is happy. Yeah, the departments are happy, but all of a sudden you're getting these elbows left and right because you probably didn't do your homework to consider building these alliances as much as you should have. What do you think about your experience in that?
You've picked up on something that no one, and I've done tons of podcasts, no one has picked up on. The
All right.
inherent position naturally creates enemies because as a chief data officer, you're managing data and everyone
Right.
technically owns data, the movement of data, the storage of data, the creation of data, the use of data. So it's unfair to have the word chief data officer when technically everyone owns data, but no one wants to take accountability for fixing the data. So what ends up happening is you go in and you spend the first 3 to 4 months just understanding what the issues are. What are
Mm.
the things the company wants to do? And everyone's going to share a bunch of things with you, but your challenge is not solving what they're sharing with you. Your challenge is to solve what's core, common, and local across what they're sharing with you. Meaning taking everything that they've said and bundling it down into the root causes that are creating those systemic or tangential issues. And what's core, meaning the root cause that's creating havoc across everyone's plate. What's common, meaning the root causes that are creating havoc amongst some individuals' plate. And what's local? What are localized issues for certain individuals? Naturally, when you do that, what ends up happening is that everyone gets bought in and they're like, okay, yes, let's go fix it. But then it means that, hey, business A, in order to fix problem Z, you're going to have to do B and stop doing C. Well, now
Right. Right.
you've
Right.
disrupted their day-to-day flow, their day-to-day operations, and business continuity is, of course, of utmost importance. And then when you go to the CIO and you're saying, well, if we want to develop analytics as a service, or we need to create, our data architecture just isn't up to date. We need to recreate our data architecture and we need to build not only conform layers and semantic layers, but we also need to build in data accessibility. So we now need to connect our identity access management with our Active Directory. But I need to work with HR to identify who do we even have that needs access to data and what level of data, which means we have to classify our data. A simple concept, as in just making data available, like data democratization, has a lot of steps in between, from data architecture to data classification to identity access management to connecting it to data Active Directory. They're like, what? Why are you telling us what to do? And I'm like, I'm
Right. Right.
not
Right.
do. This is just how we need to fix the problem. And then you get in this back and forth. So you're in a position where, while you have the responsibility to develop the capabilities and solve the problems, you don't have 100% authority. You have to work with your peers. You have to work with your business leaders. And they need to change the way they need to do stuff, or they need to do extra stuff to help you fix those problems. And so you're now naturally competing for time, but you're pushing because you need to push to create change, and people resist change. And that creates sometimes a healthy tension, and in many cases, an unhealthy tension. But you have to trade off progress for popularity because you were there to create change to begin with. So you
Right. Right.
naturally need
Right.
connection with your peers and even some of your stakeholders because you're asking them to change or do work that they just don't have the capacity and time to do, but you're nudging them. And then, of course, there's the aspect of we need to do things differently. You need to do things differently. I'm going to help you do things differently. But that can be misconstrued as, well, I don't want to do things differently. It's your job to fix. Don't tell me that I need to fix something.
Right.
So like you can kind of understand these endless little micro loops that take place while you're trying to fix everything because you have the responsibility. But everything you're trying to fix, you don't have 100% authority. You have to depend on other people, which means pushing and nudging and challenging and changing. And all those things make people uncomfortable.
Micro loops is a good expression for this, because it seems to me that based upon your approach and what I found to work is that you almost have to say that if we have to fix batch, we have to establish a real-time communication with the stakeholders, because the journey is going to be so painful that you have to plan for it to survive 1 or 2 reorg cycles, right? You already have to kind of approach the CEO and say, look, dude, I know this thing will survive multiple seasons until we can, have the character deployed, right? So
Yeah.
micro loops is a good expression for this.
I don't know.
I actually, one other thing reading your book that I kept thinking of is, wow, actually, save for the AI related details around AI strategy and selecting use cases, but as an approach, there's no reason why this should not work to, let's say, tackle a cloud migration or some other complex project that stretches over a similar amount of time and involves a similar amount of replatforming, but might not be just only data, but partly data.
Oh, yeah. Well, so that's the funny thing. It started out with the AI deployments I did, but then in retrospect, I was like, wait a minute, this framework and approach can be applied towards building data ecosystems, a new product, call center migration, customer support deployments, business process optimization. And I was like, because I got into trouble so many times, and not because I wanted to get in trouble, and not because I knew I would get in trouble, it's when you're prioritizing use cases or problems that you need to fix based on business value, it means by default, you're saying yes to some and no to others. When you say no to problems that have plagued businesses or divisions or functions for a while, you're creating like a subconscious enemy there, because you're saying, I'm sorry,
Right.
you're not important enough, or this doesn't have enough business value, and therefore I'm not going to fix it. It's not your
Right.
intention. It's not how you feel. But given the headcount, given the budget, given the timeline, and then given the strategic priorities of the company, you have to align everything to that. And so you're naturally saying no to stuff. And I learned in the process that business value is a subjective calculation. And there is inherent business value in manufacturing wanting to fix a problem, supply chain wanting to fix a problem, the head of a division who's running a P&L wanting to fix a problem or try out a new growth strategy. Who am I to pick and choose? And so just because I got into hot water a few times and people would come back and you're like, you know what? It really hurt that you didn't pick this. We've been dealing with this issue for 2 years and you chose to deal with it, next quarter or the following year. And I'm like, God, that wasn't my intention at all. Why did you feel that way? They're like, because you're not solving
Yeah.
it. I'm like, but our capacity is maxed. Headcount, funding. I would love nothing more than to fix all the problems, but I have to prioritize. Like, well, why did you prioritize this over ours? Our business value is almost comparable. And it was like, they're bringing up a really good point. And so I had to
Yeah.
completely flip the script. I don't choose the use cases. I say, here are all the problems. Here are the root causes, core, common, and local. We're going to focus on the core and the common. Here's the budget, the headcount, and how long it's going to take. And then I plot it all out in that quadrant that I walk through in the book of complexity versus criticality. And I'm like, based on our calculations, and here's how we graded each one, this has a higher chance of succeeding in pivoting from POC to production fairly quickly. These, however, is going to require us time to pivot from POC to production. These we shouldn't even waste time because we don't have the organizational maturity. We don't have the foundations in place yet. It will take me 2 years to put the data ecosystem in place before we can even turn on this capability. It's a
Right.
very objective conversation. And then I let them decide based on that visual that I create for them. And I'm like, but I'm happy to do whatever. In this steering committee, I would love to know where our focus should be.
Yeah.
And
No.
from that situation. So yeah, I walked through it in one of the chapters.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because the business value, it seems to be this elusive term that everyone in the data community is chasing. Because it's like because every time we talk about it, it's all about, like you said, it's all about the subjective stuff. It's all about the qualitative stuff. The quantitative stuff we can get out the way pretty quickly with data, but that's rarely the case, right? You rarely know. It's like if we do this qualitative improvements or like a new platform or like have this and that capability, it's a hypothetical that that many things have to be true in order for some outcome that is anyway multi-determined. And so, like you say, it's like storytelling. Basically, whoever has the better storytelling. Sometimes there's competing divisions. It's really hard to justify, is my use case better than your use case? But you can't do both, right? And then yeah,
exactly.
interesting. So but so at the end of the day, you also like, let's say other business initiatives that are struggling, they could profit from pretty much the same approach, right? To solving them, to going about the let's say the personas. Let's go around this part of the book. You talk about 10 archetypes that show up in data and AI projects, and we talked about this earlier. What I love about this is that, unlike we've done business classes, MBAs, what we've seen there is you never would have something so opinionated and based off of reality and experience of something where literally everyone who's been in a position can testify, say exactly this is what it is. But it just doesn't ring that well to be part of, let's say, organizational behavior book. But I would go and double down and say that it's a great piece of advice, and so this is the hard business reality. And if you come to grips with how to work around those personas, then your data and AI initiative is much more likely to be a success. You're much more likely to acquire the people in the team that you need. Can you share your thoughts around how you came up with this concept and how you kind of synthesize this knowledge around the 10 personas?
The 10 personas and the 10 archetypes. And we know it, right? We're all experienced individuals. And we work with the naysayers, the know-it-alls, the cheerleaders, like the curmudgeons, the doers, the evangelists. And it was just, in situations where I get to build a team from scratch, it's a lot easier for me. Now, there is a downside in that you're expected to build, but you don't have a team to build. And so you're like late. You're already late coming out of the starting gate, because by the time they bring you on board, it's been an issue for 2-3 years. And then when they bring you on board, they're impatient about when they want this stuff, but you've got to build a team from scratch. And then you've got to go through the budget. Well, first you need to know what you need to build. Then you've got to make a case, strategy, vision, mission, team, talent, gaps, blah, 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 blah. Then you got to get the headcount approval. Then you got to get the budget approval. If it's fast, all of that is 6 months. I've seen some companies take 9 months, 10 months. But you're already like late to the game and you can't hire anyone to do anything. But you do get to hire who you want to hire. And there's an advantage in that. But when you inherit a team, or you're expected to work with other cross-functional teams, right? Because within enterprises, we're matrixed, and you're expected to work with a slew of individuals. I think that's part of the art and science and the complications of working within large organizations. I used to get, and I know the personality types that just ruffle me really, really badly. And I'm getting better at working through it, and I can immediately spot it, and it's a trigger for me. But of like the 10, I can work with 8 or 9 now because I'm just used to it and I understand how they operate and I know how to work with them. There's always the 1 or 2 that still ruffle me. And I'm like, why are you making it so difficult? Like your job is not just to be difficult. But it is what it is. But when you're in a situation like that, you have no choice but to work with those people. And depending on how you leverage them, it can accelerate and expedite, or it can absolutely create project drag. Here's an example. The naysayer. It's the classic person who's been there a while, is tired, has proven what they wanted to prove, but still wants to stay employed, still respected for their knowledge base, but not the easiest to work with, and is typically the one that says, yeah, but that won't work because of, yeah, don't think so. right? Like those comments come out. How do you work with someone like that when you're trying to create something new that isn't really proven, but you think it's going to work? So if you're doing an AI deployment, as an example, you can't have those naysayers because that becomes that's a morale and like an energy that just becomes pervasive. It's like the rotten apple in the basket. Eventually the mold spreads. So how do you contain them, but knowing you still have to work with them? Well, I've learned that I am never going to pull them into the strategy discussions or in the use case selection discussions or in the vision, the mission, the capability ever. They're the Debbie Downers. I can't have them ruin the energy and the excitement of other individuals, but I need to work with them. So when do I pull them in? I pull them in during spec reviews. I pull them in during assumption reviews. I pull them in doing risk and reward reviews. I pull them in during solution architecture because I know their default is to be negative and a naysayer. They are automatically going to find the assumptions and the blind spots that we did not account for while we were going through strategy, use case, design, etc. They will automatically go to the thing that they think is not going to work, which may have been something we didn't give enough thought to or we weren't aware of. And so I can use the fact that they're naysayers during a very specific period of time, solution architecture, assumptions, risks, reviews, etc., because I know that they're going to uncover the blind spots that we may have. And so that's like my frame of reference. There's still a way of leveraging them without bringing the morale and energy down. There's still a way of working with them and saying, well, we are, but his or her skill set matches this, and then turning their negative into a positive for the benefit of your project. So I use my naysayers to find out the blind spots and the assumptions that we made that may not work. And they will tell me all the reasons why it's not going to work. And I'm like, okay, this is legit. We need to find a path. Oh, we didn't actually think of this one. We need to go back to the drawing board, or nope, ignore, nope, ignore.
Or just discount it and like, yeah, fine. Okay. We went through your filtering.
We'll take it into consideration. Yep. Oh, that's a great point.
Excellent.
We will take it into consideration.
Yeah. That's exactly the experience what we have, especially because most of this stuff, it was one or another, whether you're just augmenting an existing process with AI or creating some new. This is innovation that doesn't just by definition just doesn't run well in a large enterprise. It's designed from all sides to not have that, to not have that change. And so there's but there's also these other people who are up for anything. You also have to work with them for in a special way that they'll go with anything. That's also not great. And just understanding the friction potential, like the friction it's a good way to think about it. But then that brings me to what also one of the I guess one of the words that you use with being a rogue executive, right? And that's like, on the one hand, you can imagine, well, that's just someone who just doesn't follow the rules, just does whatever they want. But reading the book, I was negatively surprised to see that you mean it in a much more softer way, in terms of that just someone who is fearless and undoubtful in the face of adversity, of going about these implementations and these difficult projects, and not really rogue in any bad way, of course.
The term itself is not meant to be difficult in any shape or form. You're not pushing back for the sake of pushing back. You're not a curmudgeon. You're not a naysayer. You're not being difficult. You have to have a different mindset, because when you're introducing new things or you're challenging the status quo, you by default are going against the grain. You by default are doing something different, thinking something different. And so that's the part that like what going rogue really means.
This is the experience that some of us had, like when you try to push a project like this, and then you hear some naysayers, some or some just not let's say more hidden naysayers complain, and it's like, what do you think? You will just do A and B and see what will happen? And you're thinking to yourself, absolutely, 100%. And they're like, yeah, well, we have to understand, but you just have to kind of plow through the difficulty. Right. In general, we discussed it also. I remember it was part of our discussion in Switzerland, the understanding of low code and high code capabilities in the team, uh, and how to go about it. Just in general, where things are going, what do you feel like? How would you advise people to focus on which of these capabilities, being good at more of the business, the social aspect, and kind of then, and then get some low code skills in the data and AI space, or double down on the classical high code skills? And for which
You
I guess for which things you'd recommend what?
you need a balance. I've never been as successful with a highly technical team. I think they're marvelous. I think they're geniuses. I think they can build the solutions, but I don't have enough individuals working with the businesses, translating what they need, training, educating, carrying over. Again, you can build the most amazing widget, but if it's not being used, what's the use? And so I need low code talent as well that understands the space, but may not know how to write Scala or Java or Python, may not create a data pipeline, or may not be able to understand what type of models to use, or when clustering mechanisms and methods are more appropriate than KNN model. And that's okay. I don't need them to know how to do the work. I need the low code individuals to understand why we're doing the work and to help bring it into the business. That introduction, that translation, that adoption, and the usage. Because I've built some beautiful products. And I say we, I've dreamt of a vision. I even created my own wireframes. And I'm like, I have this vision. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, here's what we need to do. And then together it would take shape and take shape and take shape, and we'd build it. And then I'd get like 60 users. And I'm like, why? One, is gorgeous. Two, it functions really well. Three, it's exactly what they asked for. Why on earth do we only have 60 users and not several hundred users? And
Right.
that's where the no code or the low code talent kicks in.
Absolutely. I think in the classical space, we used to call this business analysis, business analysis people. And then kind of the whole thing changed with the naming, kind of lost track of who's
Yeah.
doing the development and who's doing the business analysis. But ultimately, this remains as a fundamental truth.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, there's a so in this regard, do you think that kind of on a more, I guess, philosophical note, given all that AI can do now and can solve all the math questions, do you think AI will push out, math skills and in favor of more eloquence and verbal skills? Or do you think both will be enhanced, or there's no change that we'll experience? Because it depends
Mm,
on the kind of people we want to hire, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, based on the how we're going to work with this technology and all that.
I I think what's going to happen is what I don't want to happen, but is inevitable and happening. It's no different than right now. I see a lot of like, and I don't want to say younger generations, forget age. There's a lot of individuals that if they read something on the internet, they automatically assume it's true. Well,
Oh
it's
yeah,
funny. It must be true.
must be true.
Why? Why? And I think if you had any level of common sense, or if you develop your critical thinking skills, you naturally have a scientific mindset in the sense that you question things before you just take it with a grain of salt and assume it's true. We've gotten lazy with validating and understanding the source in which the information has come from, questioning whether it's biased or balanced, and then synthesizing it in a way where we interpret what's being shared and the purpose of it. We've just gotten lazy with that stuff. And I think with all the cool capabilities and all the advent that AI is bringing, we are going to further weaken our muscles around common sense and critical thinking, because we are
Exactly.
exchanging the usage of our cognitive capabilities for the convenience of these AI tools. And so, even like something like content creation, if you're a copywriter, there is an art form in writing something eloquent and succinct and concise. If now you're using AI as a tool, as you should, because it's a massive time saver, those muscles that you're used to practicing and developing and building will not be developed and built. And what happens with muscles you don't use? They become weak. you experience muscular attrition. And I think the same is going to go. So I think there's going to be certain skill sets that we're fundamentally just going to lose over time because we have these tools available to us and we don't have to exercise them. And I think common sense and critical thinking are the top two on the list.
Absolutely. And I think that I think we already kind of lost. I mean, if the way that, I don't want to sound like an old person complaining about the younger generation, but this end-to-end understanding of, software development, but in a way where I know what I'm programming, I know what it's doing, I know what data is taking, I know what it's doing. I think this over time in the past 10, 15 years has gotten way detached. I mean, because of increasing complexity, because of just like now software is more complex and everything in the whole, we don't do monoliths anymore and things like this. But then there's common sense of someone understanding this end to end. Like, I think this will get like the variance is going to go much higher between people who still have that skill to understand this end to end and are willing to learn it and do it, and people that are just laser focused on what they're doing and have no context of the bigger picture whatsoever. Interestingly enough, the more information, the more AI is out there. I think, like you said, I'm also fearful that we're not going to go into the direction of, everyone will connect the dots now. It's more like going to be like people who connect the dots are going to connect them quicker, and others will may struggle or fall off a cliff because of this, muscular atrophy of these certain skills. I fully agree with you. Yeah. What was your, well, I wanted to still just have another question on the book. What was your thinking process around, being a successful executive entrepreneur? You didn't really have to write this book, but someone made you write this particular book, because it's rare for someone to have such a pragmatic, and honest book about. Like, I've read a lot of business books. I mean, my library is over there. And there's a ton of stuff, and I think at some point the reason I'm asking is that for most of the business books you read, you see that someone had an idea and then had a lot of fluff to it, added a lot of volume, and at some point didn't believe their own stories anymore. But you, what was your experience in deciding you wanted to write this exact book?
So it's interesting that you say that. I've been so busy doing, I haven't been writing. It is not natural for me to write because I'm just so busy doing the work. That's what I do. I do the work. And then a year ago, I made the big decision of giving up the logo, giving up the brand, and just needed to go focus on other things. And so I went independent. And writing a book was never in the cards. Now, oddly enough, I've been thinking about writing a book for 4 years. And for fun, I've been writing chapters here and there. But manifesting it into this year, I just would never have thought. And then oddly enough, about 6 months into it, I said, now's the time. Let me just do it. And then when I focus in, like when I hone in, things happen. And I'm a wonderful creator in that sense that I get laser focused, I get maniacally focused, and like nothing stops me. So when I decided that, okay, the book is going to happen, one thing led after another. I was in Dubai. Joe Reese, Steve Newry, and Jepson. We were all hanging out. I didn't know, oddly enough, when I met Joe in October, we had 1,100 contacts in common in LinkedIn, but we'd never crossed paths, and I didn't know of him, and he didn't know of me. Steve Nori and I knew each other tangentially, but like we finally all got a chance to meet and talk and have fun. And so that was like the first step. And then I was starting to talk to agents and publishers. Steve introduced me to my current publisher. We spoke. Great, contract signed. Joe was kind of like, how come you haven't written a book? I'm like, why would I write a book? And he's like, well, you've got all this experience. And I was like, yeah, but who would want to hear from me? And then that was the thing of like me writing chapters and then like you reading so many books based on researchers and academics. I'm like, everything I read is based on people who've read other things, but not people who've actually done the things. And I'm like, I actually have real world experience. I have all the failures and I'm okay talking about my failures. And so with the encouragement of a few folks who've written stuff in the past, with the introduction to a publisher and then signing, like it was just A plus B equals C. It just happened naturally. So the conversation happened in November. I signed my publishing deal in December. My final draft was submitted February 9th. Like Wiley to this day was like, you're the fastest person to write a book. And I was like, well, because I already knew all it. It wasn't me researching it. It was stuff that I've already done before. And I have all the postmortem notes from every project I've ever deployed of what worked, what didn't work, why it didn't work. All I had to do was go through all my notes and just summarize them into key themes. So writing it for me was very easy, oddly enough. Editing it was more difficult because I needed it and wanted it to be concise and succinct, and I didn't want to like overwhelm individuals. But I also woke up 4 o'clock every morning and did not stop writing until 8 a.m. So heck or high water, 7 days a week for 4 hours a day, right? So when I talk about when I get focused, I get laser focused. I already had all the notes. It was a matter of organizing it into themes. And I did that every day, 7 days a week, during Christmas, during New Year's, did not matter. I did not take a break to get that book out there. The marketing is oddly enough the hardest part for me because I don't like selling and I don't like marketing. If I believe in a subject, I naturally sell, but I don't like asking people, go buy the book, go do this. It's very unnatural for me. And that's where some of the friction for me came in, and I had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. But to kind of go back to your original question, it was written because I'm like, so many people are doing this right now and they have no idea of the assumptions that don't hold true or of the mistakes they're going to be make, of things that advice they're getting from so-called experts. I'm not even an expert, and I've been doing these deployments since 2011. I just don't want to stray them in the wrong path. So if I can aggregate my 13, 14 years of AI deployments into a few chapters of don't do these and try these, why not? And so I had the encouragement, I had the time, I had the focus, I had the desire. And it just so happens that a lot of people are doing this right now.
Right. No, that actually makes sense, and I know Jepson and Joe, and I'm sure that I can imagine Joe saying, "How come you never put your thoughts in writing?" That's the interesting thing about when you have when you're bored, you should read, and people like you, I guess many of us, we never, if we ever should be bored, we read, but if you think a lot, there's this thing that tells you, okay, I need to write this down. I need to write this down, that down. And at some point you have enough written down where you can synthesize and summarize it. But I'm fully with you that the whole, if you have the experience, if you've done the project, if you've done the work, it's, there's just orders of magnitude more valuable, infinitely more valuable than just the academic stuff we would learn at a business school, right? How, just before we wrap this up, where can, you're speaking at some events in the future, where can people find you and find out more about you, the book, or see you at events?
So all this again is new, but I am, I'm sure people have seen, I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. So follow, I guess, subscribe to the newsletter, Sol, S-O-L, Rashidi, R-A-S-H-I-D-I. If you have questions or want to reach out to me directly, I do have a website, solrashidi.com. And then the book is available both on Amazon and Walmart. So far, so good. Like all 5 stars, with the exception of 1 4-star. It did hit bestseller a few weeks ago. So I'm super blessed and very lucky, but I'm also killing myself trying to get the word out there. So yeah, any support would be fantastic. I am a first-time author. I wish I knew what I was doing, to be honest with you, but I'm getting some great advice and I'm listening to the advice, and I am just going and not stopping and trying. And I'm like, what's the worst thing that happens? So your support would be much appreciated.
So thanks so much for your time talking to me on my podcast. Warm greetings from me from Austria. And I hope to see you soon somewhere around the world at some event. And thanks everyone. Bye.